It's a great honor to be here tonight at the Japan Society. I want to thank the Japan Foundation, the Nippon Foundation, and A Public Space, our partners in New York, and of course this wonderful cadre of artists, scholars, translators, and writers who are here with us tonight. As you know, we're going to talk a bit about Japan's most famous living novelist, Haruki Murakami. And all of these artists and scholars and translators have something to do with Haruki Murakami on one level or another. So you're going to hear some very interesting stories about Murakami's work, but also we're going to talk about translation and writing, creating fiction, creating art, creating poetry, vis-à-vis language and art. So it's an incredible, like I said, a great team we've got here tonight from Tokyo, from Seattle, from Toronto, all amassed here at the Japan Society. I really want to thank Tomomi Sekiya, who I've worked with before, for putting this together this evening. It's a wonderful show. Again, the Japan Foundation has been a great supporter of us, the Nippon Foundation as well. Public Space is our partner here in New York City. And without much further ado, I'm going to introduce Professor Ted Goossen from York University, who is currently translating Mr. Murakami's work into English. The last book came out in December. It's called The Strange Library. And two more books are coming out later this year, in August, I believe. Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973. Ted is also a co-editor of Monkey Business Magazine, which is here tonight, the only English language magazine of Japanese literature that comes out once a year. Ted is also the editor of the Oxford Book of Japanese Short Stories. We're honored to have him with us tonight. Turn it over to Ted Goossen.
Well, first of all, I want to say this is like a dream come true, because sitting to my left is Motoyuki Shibata, and to my right is Jay Rubin, and I've learned more about translation from the two of them than I have from anything else in my life. They're both amazing translators, and they've helped me a great deal. So this feels good. And my luck, I suppose, at being able to translate Haruki Murakami is also a bit unexpected, or it was. I remember I was sitting I have a country place north of Toronto where I live, and I was sitting there one day and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and this voice with slightly accented English said, "This is Haruki Murakami." And I said, "Masaka," like hell, I thought one of my friends was playing a trick on me. And he said, "No, this is Haruki Murakami." And then my heart began to pound. And I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in Syracuse, New York." And I said, "Well, would you like to come here?" And he said, "Yes." And it was that simple and straightforward. So I hadn't met him before. Of course, I'd been reading his work, and I'd written about his work. And I remember one time in particular in Washington, D.C. at the Association of Asian Studies conference, where Jay had organized a panel on Murakami. I'm sure you remember that day. It was, usually panels on Japanese literature are sleepy affairs. This one was packed. I mean, people were standing around the back of the room, and it was a large room. It was absolutely packed because people knew about this writer, but he'd never been discussed in an academic situation before. And there was a tremendous curiosity and great response to the various papers that were given. So I had actually translated short works by Murakami at the beginning. A couple of short stories I published, one in the Canadian Literary Magazine and another one in a magazine called Soho Square, which came out of Great Britain. And so it was, for me, a wonderful opportunity to translate his fiction. First of all, some stories, and then The Strange Library, which, as Roland mentioned, came out in December, and now the two first novels that Murakami wrote in 1979 to 1980, Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973. And they're coming out in a single volume because they're quite short. So put together, they're about 300 pages long. And it's been a lot of fun to work on them. Murakami Haruki and I arrived at Waseda University in the same year. He arrived in April 1969 as a first-year student who'd been a Ronin for 1 year, and I arrived in that fall as an exchange student from Oberlin College in Ohio to spend my junior year abroad in Japan. So we were both on the same campus, though of course we never met each other. I was hanging out with the basketball team, and that wasn't really where he was at. But it was a very lively year with lots of student demonstrations. The campus was closed at the end of my year there, and a lot of that stuff comes through in his writing. And because he and I are so close in age and both had that early experience, I felt very close to him as I was doing the translation. And the language, as it were, I don't know if what we really do is magical. It's a nice thought anyway. You know, I felt very close to the language. It was our generation. You know, he was in Japan, I was, except for that year, in Ohio, and I'm from New York, so there's that too. And so it was fun. And I think reading Murakami is fun. Translating him is certainly fun. And it's fun to be here today and meet all of you. Thank you.
So we also have with us tonight Jay Rubin, who has translated works by Haruki Murakami since 1989? Before that?
A little late. Well, 89 was when I first read him, but I think the first publication came out in 91.
91. So if you've read the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, if you've read Notes from the Underground.
Notes from the Underground,
Notes
yes.
from the Underground.
No, I wrote that.
Oh, you wrote that. This is also Mr. Dostoevsky. No, if you've read Haruki's works through the years in English, Jay Rubin has done the bulk of them, a large majority of them. And we're lucky to have Jay here tonight because he's not only a translator, he's also a newly minted novelist.
Who can't quite believe that, but...
And his book will be available tonight after the show. So I'm just going to ask Jay, I mean, your experiences as a translator shifting into the role of a novelist, how would you explain that shift to the audience?
Well, first, before I get into that, I'd like to talk about the title of this event. Well, the magical part I can't argue with. I mean, there is something, and even the word art. I remember once on this stage talking about my uneasiness, but finally willingness to accept the term art with regard to translation. Because there's a large part of it that you can't really explain. It happens as you wrestle with one language, trying to get it into the other language. And you're not just taking grammatical forms from one language and mechanically transferring them into the other. There's something unusual going on. There's something...
It's creative, I mean, isn't it?
It is not creative.
It's not creative.
No, it is not creative. People try to use that term about translation. I don't believe you can use that. I can talk a little more about that. But the main thing here that takes me aback in the title of this event is from Haruki Murakami. That makes me feel very old because I mean, whenever people would talk about the kind of the sweep of Japanese literature, it was always from so-and-so, from Natsume Soseki, or if a little later, from Mishima Yukio even, but from somebody else, certainly. And Murakami was the culmination. Now it's from, I could just stop talking because I'm just I'm the guy who's been, or one of the guys who's been doing this stuff for, God, since, as you say, it was 1991, I think, the first story that I translated of Haruki's came out in the New Yorker, and a very dear friend of mine who's here in the audience tonight named Paul Levinson. Well, another very dear friend of mine was the editor. She's here. This is Linda Asher. And Paul Levinson is also in the audience, and he was so thrilled at the...
Was that TV People?
No, I
Which
didn't
story?
do TV People.
Which
That
story?
was Alfred Birnbaum.
Which story was the first one?
First one was the Elephant Vanishes,
Okay.
which is a wonderful story. I still think it's a wonderful story. It's the title of a collection. There are two. I've often said, even in public, that I think Murakami is a better short story writer than a novelist, and there are just three amazing books of short stories of his available in English. One of them is called The Elephant Vanishes,
Right.
which people thought was so good that they then reinvented it in Japanese. It never came out in that form in Japanese. The thing was put together using translations that I had done and that Alfred Birnbaum had done. The collection was put together by Gary Fisketjon, who was a Knopf editor. He did a wonderful job of combining stories from various periods of Murakami's, and it was such a good book that then maybe 5 or 10 years later, the Japanese publisher Shinchosha decided that there should be such a book in Japanese, and so now there is a book called The Elephant Vanishes in Japanese, but it didn't exist that way first. It was first something.
So as you can probably guess, Jay has been not only a translator, but a literary scholar of Japanese literature for a number of years. He taught at Harvard, he taught at University of Washington in Seattle. Now, as I said earlier, he's a novelist. You have a book that you have written, which has taken you a bit of time to finish. And it's done.
I started it in 1985. It took a while.
Can you talk a little bit about going from translation to writing fiction?
Well, it's funny. I started in 1985. I didn't read Murakami until 1989.
Right.
So I, with my wife's help, put together this novel about the situation in Seattle for Japanese Americans, primarily Japanese Americans, but also Japanese-born people who were living on the West Coast at the time of Pearl Harbor, and then ended up getting locked up. I didn't know a thing about that until I was a graduate student. It was my professor in graduate school who first mentioned to me that 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry had been locked up in concentration camps out in the desert. Does everybody know that happened? I think nowadays a lot more people know that it happened. I've talked to high school students who have in fact learned about it in school, they've read about it. That never was the case before. I think up until certainly not, maybe 10 years ago, it was still not very well known, and it was not all that well known on the East Coast.
Yep.
I didn't know a thing about it. I went to school in Chicago. My professor, who was a specialist primarily in history and Japanese literature, mentioned this thing to me. I couldn't quite believe it. I started reading about it. There's a wonderful book called Nisei Daughter. Has anybody read Nisei Daughter? Everybody should read Nisei Daughter. It's a memoir written by a woman who grew up in Seattle about. Well, an awful lot of it is about Japanese American life before Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, that section is only about the last third of the book, but it's an incredible document of what went on. And that, among other factual books, was one of my sources. And I mainly wrote this novel because I was angry, because there was absolutely no constitutional justification for locking up a particular racial group and sending them out in the desert and keeping them there during the war. In fact, it was known even before people were sent away that there was absolutely no evidence of any kind of espionage, any kind of sabotage. And there were lies told. All this came out finally in the 1980s when the redress movement finally wrung up an apology out of the U.S. government. Well, anyway, here I am.
Right,
getting
so
worked up.
He's getting a little.
I get worked up when I talk about
and we're going to
this,
have some time to talk about this with the Q&A and with the reception. But
But
Jay's
let me just
book,
say
yes.
that I wanted to. I got angry and
You were
wanted to write a
passionate,
book
yeah,
about
yeah,
this, about this terrible phenomenon that occurred in our country. And nobody wanted to hear about it. We got the book finished in about 1987. Tried to send it around to agents. Tried to send it around to publishers. There was no interest. And
Surprise.
after that, I got busy translating Murakami. That's when I started getting busy.
So it comes full circle.
So,
We'll talk. We'll talk about
okay.
it. We also
He
have.
wants me to shut up,
Well,
obviously.
no. I want to talk about this some more, and we will. But we, as I mentioned, Toronto and Seattle. We also have a whole wonderful crew from Tokyo here tonight, including the founding editor of Monkey Business, along with Ted Goossen, Motoyuki Shibata, who is easily the most revered translator in Japan of English language novels, mostly American novelists, into Japanese. So this is going the other direction across the Pacific. Moto is also a dear friend of mine and a scholar and a wonderful writer in his own right. And it's wonderful to have him here tonight. Motoyuki Shibata.
Hi. I feel mildly tortured with this microphone. I realize how much unnecessary movement I make. But anyway, since the topic is translation, Haruki Murakami, I maybe should talk about Haruki as translator. But before that, I'd like to go back to the 19th century. It is a well-known fact among Haruki Murakami fans that Haruki wrote the very first passage of his very first novel, Hear the Wind Sing, in English. And it wasn't that he had the ambition to publish in English. He did it because he wanted to break away from the prevalent conventional Japanese literary style. So writing via English helped free himself of the burden of the traditional Japanese style. And he wasn't the first one to do it. Almost exactly a century ago, there was a wonderful novelist, one of the very first modern Japanese novelists, Futabate Shime. And in the 1880s, he was writing one of his major novels, Ukigumo, the floating clouds. And he had, probably in 1886 or something like that, he had finished the first part of that novel. And this part was deeply steeped in the previous Edo literary style. And he wanted to get away from it. So when he started writing part 2, he wrote very first passage in Russian. So just exactly like Haruki did. And so, I think this shows a foreign language. I mean, the value of foreign language to free yourself from the tradition when it's felt as burden, rather than as a legacy. And also, Futabate Shime was very influential as translator. Probably in terms of prose, his translation of the Russian writer Turgenev was even more influential than his own prose as a novelist. And probably it's too early to talk about the influence of Haruki on younger writers, either as translator or as novelist. But there's no doubt whatsoever that he made a big impact on younger writers and readers, both as writers and translators. So there's so much similarity between the two. And when you think about similarity, when you also want to think about difference too. Probably the biggest difference is that whereas Futabate Shime was so reverential, he had so much respect toward the original Russian writers, and I'm not saying that the Haruki doesn't have any respect toward the writers he translates, but in his case, I think it's not so much reverence as empathy he feels toward the writers he translates. And this difference, this shift, we could say, from a reverence to empathy shows, in brief, the literary history of Japan of these 100 years. That's it. Thank you.
I should mention that Moto translates into Japanese such American stalwarts as Paul Auster, Thomas Pynchon, Rebecca Brown.
I should mention that I'm Jay's translator too.
Oh, yes, and Jay Rubin.
One of the translators, Jay's novel.
So some of you might be aware of Pynchon's novel Mason and Dixon, which is quite a feat in English, in which he employs kind of a slapsticky 18th century prose to tell the story of the two explorers. Moto translated that into Japanese. I have no idea how he did it, but he's an extraordinary artist himself. We also have two wonderful artists here tonight, also from Tokyo, both award-winning artists in their fields. Aoko Matsuda, who is a novelist and short story writer, and we also have Satoshi Kitamura, who is a graphic artist, illustrator, storyteller himself. So I'm going to turn over the microphones that we're all wearing on our heads to Aoko Matsuda. Aoko Matsuda.
村上春樹さんとの私の出会いは高校の時にアメリカに留学してたんですけれども授業でいつも英語の本ばかり当たり前なんですけど読まされて言って変ですね勉強しに行ってるので読んでいてでちょっと日本語がちょっと小説が読みたいなみたいな気持ちになっても売っていないので読めなかったんですけどおばの家にノルウェーの森の上下巻がありましてそれをもう日本語だみたいな気持ちで貪るように読んだのが始まりです。でごめんなさい。
So I want to talk about how I encountered Haruki Murakami myself. In high school, I was studying in the U.S., studying abroad in the U.S., and of course we were reading in school everything in English, and I was craving books written in Japanese, but of course those were hard to come by. But I happened to find the two volumes of Norwegian Wood in my aunt's house, so that was my encounter with Haruki.
でその時ちょうど上の学年の子たちが国語の授業というか、アメリカンリトレチャーというかリトレチャーの授業で羊をめぐる冒険を読んでいてで私に同じ日本人だろうっていうふうに話しかけてきたことがあってこの作家はどうしてこんな変な作品を書くんだすごい変だっていうのを言われて日本人は全員こういう変なことを考えているのかという質問されたことがあってそれがなんかちょっと美しい作品を書いてる日本人は書くねみたいなよりも変な作品を書いてる日本人はこういうものを書くのかって言われたことがむしろちょっと誇らしい気持ちになりました。
So in the literature class in the year above me, they happened to be reading Wild Sheep's Chase in English. And so some of the students came to talk to me because I was Japanese, and they would ask me, do all Japanese writers write such strange stories, strange narratives? And why do they write such things? And it actually made me really proud that they had that impression of Murakami's novels. Not that Japanese people wrote about beautiful things, but they were writing such extraordinary, strange stories.
でその時自分は授業でレイモンド・カーバーのカセイドラルをやったりとかしてたんですけれども、今度その2年間留学して日本に帰った後に村上春樹さんがそのレイモンド・カーバーの翻訳をされているっていうことを知りました。
So at that time, in my English class, we were reading Raymond Carver's Cathedral. And after 2 years, I went back to Japan, and I discovered that Murakami was translating Carver's story.
はい、でそれで今度日本語でレイモンド・カーバーを読んだりしてるうちに今度柴田元幸さんを知ったりとかして、村上春樹さんは日本の作家で、日本の文学として出会ったわけなんですけれども、同時に海外文学の扉を開いてくれたところもあると思っています。です。
So I read Raymond Carver when I came back to Japan in Japanese, and then through Murakami's translation, also discovered the translator Motoyuki Shibata. And so not only did Murakami kind of expose me to Japanese literature and writers, but also opened the door to American literature as well.
でその後にやっぱり海外文学がやりたくてですね、英米文学科に進んで勉強して、で卒業した後に翻訳学校に通ったりしてたんですけれども、文学の翻訳っていうのはもう本当に一握りの人しかできないので、ちょっと諦めていたところがあったのですが、20歳の終わりに作家になったんですが、そのおかげで翻訳もできるようになりました。
So I became, because I was really fascinated with foreign literatures, I ended up being an English major in college. And after graduating, I went to translation school for several years and was an aspiring translator. But at the same time, it's very difficult to become a literary translator. And I almost gave up many, many times. But at the end of my 20s, I finally I became a writer. And then at the same time, I also became a translator.
はい、でそれで今カレン・ラッセルというアメリカの作家の翻訳をやっているんですが、村上春樹さんはどう思われてるのかわからないんですけど、私は小説を書くことと翻訳することっていうのは行為としてとてもよく似ていると思っていて。
So now I'm a translator of the American writer Karen Russell, and I don't know how Murakami thinks about this, but for me, writing and translating are very much similar acts.
はい、でなぜ似ているかというと、どちらもやっぱりちょっと初め不確かに聞こえてくる声を一番なんていうんですかね、こう聞こえるんだっていう形に整えていく作業だと思うんですね。でそれが自分の小説を書く場合は自分の頭の中の声を整えていく作業で、翻訳をする場合はもう誰かが書いた素晴らしい作品の声を今度違う言語、日本語に整えていくっていう作業だと思っています。
And I say that writing and translating is a similar act for me because in both cases, I think that there are voices that are kind of floating around my head in a very vague and nebulous state, and it's really the process of ordering, putting an order to those voices. And so if it's my own novel, it's my own voice that I'm hearing, that I'm putting into language in an orderly form, and when it's translating, it's someone else's voice that I'm writing down, ordering.
はい、でその翻訳を作家が翻訳をしていると自分の作品を書いていないのでまるでサボっているかのように言われる時がたまにあるんですけれども、私はちょっと翻訳をすることによって初めにまず本を読んでた時にもちろん文学は好きだったんですけど、作家になった時にもっと文学を好きになることができて、かつ翻訳をするとさらに文学を好きになることが自分もできたので、これからも続けていきたいなと思っています。
So when writers translate, when I'm translating, I'm often seen as being lazy, of not doing my job of writing my own novels. But I actually don't think so at all. Translating has really made me love literature, and I've always loved reading, but becoming a writer, first of all, made me like literature even more, and then translating, the intimate act of translating, really made me fall in love with literature all over again. So for me, translating is a really important part of writing.
Great. I should add here that Hitomi Yoshio, who's doing the interpreting tonight, the yeoman's job tonight of interpreting, is also a highly regarded scholar, a writer, and translator in her own right, and her work appears in the new issue of Monkey Business, issue 5, also in issue 4. And 3. So she's been with us for a long time. She's an excellent artist in her own right. She's just helping us out here tonight with the translations for Aoko. Hitomi Yoshio.
Thanks, Rowan.
I neglected to mention that everyone up here, with the exception of me, is a gifted translator, including Satoshi Kitamura, who also lived in London for a few decades, I think. Yes. And is an award-winning children's book author, illustrator, graphic storyteller. His work is also in the new issue of Monkey Business, which is available tonight. He actually worked from a poem by Charles Simic, whom some of you may be familiar with. Charles Simic, the American poet, who is featured in Monkey Business in part because Shibata Sensei, Motoyuki Shibata, translates Simic's works into Japanese. So Satoshi Kitamura is with us tonight. Satoshi.
Thank you. I'm talking about, well, this is, because I'm the only artist, they're all writers, so, and this is about lecture about translation. So we made it like an illustration as translation. I don't know if it's true or not, but when I illustrate books, I have to read the text many, many times. And that's how I work every time. But this project, Motoyuki Shibata selected and translated the poems from America or England, and I illustrated. This one, for example, is Emily Dickinson's poem, and there's a famous portraits of Emily Dickinson, and I traced the outline and colored it so that the poem would fit in her body. And so this is the one, and the another one like this. This is like a very strange poem about monkey, so this I just did a monkey, yeah. And this is a Lewis Carroll poem. This is about crocodile. Again, it's a very funny poem, and so this sort of thing. Again, this is a Charles Simic poem. So it's about these poems have a kind of story in it. So I can draw like this. I can just pick up things from the text and draw it. And this one, again, this is a kind of, well, I can't really say the image of the poem, but something I felt reading the poem. It's a bit spooky. And this one, I just didn't know how to do it in a way. So what I did is just made a background so that the poem stands out. So it's more like atmospheric kind of thing. Again, this is Herman Melville's. Is this a poem? It's a passage from the, yeah, okay. And it's about the water. And what I did is just I put the blue paint on top and folded the paper in half and opened it. So it's like a reflection in a way. So it's kind of intuitive sort of thing in a way. And this is, again, it's a sort of describing the text. And it's about the net curtain, or was it net curtain, or sort of the net thing on the door. So I used a material, and painted over it. So it's again, maybe this is a one. This is again, it's a sort of a story. Nathaniel Hawthorne's notebook, is it from the notebook?
It's from his diary.
Diary. Okay, and it's again, it's more like a directory showing what's the text say. And this type of abstracting is I just couldn't figure out how to do it. So, and this is the sort of thing I've been to Wales. This is by a Welsh poet, Dylan Thomas. And I kind of had a feeling about Wales. It's sort of dark and rainy. So I made it dark and rainy. And again, this is about a dog. This is about sorry. Yeah. It's a Shinjuku station. So I did it simply as a platform. And this one is Edgar Allan Poe's poem called To Helen. And somehow I thought this is very archaic type of style. And I kind of sort of made a little joke. Which Helen do you mean? You know? So I did a lot of beautiful ladies. Anyway, this is the title poem of this anthology, Emperor of Ice Cream. It's a totally crazy poem. And so I just did a crazy picture. And so on. And anyway, I want to show you something else. This is the book written by a writer called Sarah B. I had never met her when I did the book. This is a book called The Yes. The Yes is a character. And Yes just woke up from hibernation or whatever and went on a trip. And these black things on the front, it's a characters called nodes. They are like a type of insects or whatever, really. And whatever the Yes wanted to do, the nodes tried to stop him. But he wasn't bothered by it, so he kind of went on and on. And so when he wanted to cross the sort of bridge, the node tries to stop him, but he didn't care, and he just went on and on. And eventually, nodes gave up. This is a lot of wordplay in the text. Like the place they are in is called where. And anyway, when I read the text, I thought this is really good because it's abstract in a sense. But also I had to make it more sort of concrete, visual, more simple for children because this is supposed to be read by about 6 years old, 5, 6 years old. And finally, these nodes gave up. And so Yes just went. And I made him without eyes or nodes. I just wanted to make him simple so that reader can just add their own eyes or nodes if they like. And I thought I want to make it a little bit unique, so it's got only 3 legs. But anyway, this is the kind of thing I do, but basically it's really fun to interpret text into visuals, especially when the text is really good, and when it's really unique. I liked my own stories myself as well, but it's not less like a translation. But when I have to illustrate a book written by someone else, yes, it is very much like a translation from language to visual, and it's one of the most enjoyable things I can imagine. I've done lots of illustration for poetry books and so on, but especially when I come across a very good text for children's books, it's such a challenge to make it into visuals. So anyway, so I can sort of connect it, visual and translation and illustration. So anyway, okay? Thanks.
Satoshi Kitamura.
Thank you.
Well, can I add something?
Yes.
I would have been very uncomfortable publishing just the original poem and my translation because I thought my translation didn't give enough access to the spirit of the original. But Satoshi's illustration is like, or maybe literally the second translation. So we can provide two translations to the original, and that way we thought we are providing enough root access to the original, and I'm very happy with that book too. Thank you.
Thank you. All of these writers, translators, artists, and scholars are featured in issue 5 of Monkey Business, which will be available after this event tonight at the reception. And of course, the newly minted novelist J. Rubin, his novel will be available tonight as well, and I'm sure everyone would be happy to sign copies for you if you're interested in taking something home tonight. But before that, we have an opportunity to engage you directly. Obviously, these are all very different people. with all of it, no, not you, you're the same, sorry. We're Jay and I are the same. With extraordinary talents and transcultural intelligences, really, knowing how to go back and forth between two cultures and two worlds, which is ever more important in the 21st century. So I'd like to open up the floor to you and let you ask questions. I think, there may be there's a microphone, so everyone can hear you ask the question. Please take it away and ask what you'd like. There's a gentleman here. Yes.
First of all, thank you. It's fascinating to hear all your different perspectives. I'm only an English speaker and some Italian. Wind-Up Bird Chronicle was the first Murakami book I read, and it struck me so much. It's one of those books you remember where you were, when you first read it. But I've only encountered him in translation. And I guess one of the questions I had is, I was also struck by the title that said From Murakami Onwards, and whether from an academic perspective or writer's perspective or an artist's perspective, what do you think explains the Murakami effect? His persona, his resonance it almost overshadows, in a way, it seems to me, all of Japanese literature in America. Notwithstanding, the great history of Mishima and the older, as you were pointing to, Jay, but it's his star has risen to such heights that I just wonder if there's anything, as either a translator or coming from Japan, that in your mind explains this. Because I've heard there are many explanations, use of jazz music, use of American idiom, titles like Norwegian Wood, but it would be great to hear your perspective on that.
Jay,
You want to start, Jay?
I'm not sure I quite heard the whole thing. I'm hard of hearing, and I miss a lot. So it sounds as though...
Essentially, how would you explain the Murakami mystique? I mean, he's a bestseller in several countries, right? Not just America. I mean, in Korea and Europe.
I think his fascination with the brain just goes beyond any kind of national borders.
How would you define that fascination with the brain?
He's so fascinated by the workings of the gray matter. He just plunges. He'll do it with fairly obvious symbolism. I mean, there are about 100 pages in the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle where the protagonist is sitting in a well. And there aren't too many novels in which, like a fifth of the novel, nothing happens, but the protagonist is sitting down in a well thinking or imagining. I think that he just draws people in. I have gotten so much feedback from people who say that he writes for me. And certainly I felt that way. I felt when I first read him that this was a writer who was writing exclusively for me. And then I was disappointed to find that there were all these thousands of people out there, millions, who felt the same way. But he's quite capable of doing that, and doing it in a variety of cultures, because I think the kinds of mental experiences that he writes about are not limited by religion or by nationality or by any kind of external quality of that sort. So I think that's what makes him catch on so widely.
Ted, what's your take? I mean, you're translating Haruki now. Why do you think he's so big, so many places?
Well, I remember there was a kind of symposium in Japan about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, in which translators from around the world of Murakami came together, and I was part of that. And I think there were about 30 of us, translators from China, from Taiwan and Hong Kong and Malaysia, translators from Russia. He's very big in Russia. Translators from Europe, and of course Korea, I think has been from the beginning one of his largest audiences. Norwegian Wood was such an enormous hit in Korea. And it's interesting, I think, that Norwegian Wood probably had a greater impact among his Asian audiences and less here, whereas here it's been more Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, and before that Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World. So, and I was looking at all these translators, you know, and of course we like to congratulate ourselves on our skills and so forth. But I was thinking, hey, wait a minute, you know, like he's selling in all these places, and we can't all be wonderful translators. There has to be a turkey or two out there, you know, in the group. But something about Murakami's storytelling ability, I think it's partly that he's such a masterful storyteller. And I agree with Jay that his short stories may, in fact, even be a level higher than his novels. But his novels carry you along, and it's such a pleasant trip. And yeah, they really, first time I read a Murakami novel, it really made me, I think, love literature. And the fact that I could read it in Japanese and just enjoy it so much was, for me, a kind of a breakthrough. And I always will credit him for that.
When I first met Haruki, he told me that he wanted to get away from Japan. That's all he wanted to do when he was a young man. As big as he is everywhere in the world, he's mega big in Japan, right? I mean, his novels, when they're published, sell millions immediately, the first night. Moto, why?
You know, it's hard enough for me to explain why I like his books so much. So I can't explain why other people like him. But
Aoko, what do you think? Why do you think Haruki Murakami is such a huge phenomenon in Japan as a Japanese writer? What do you think?
でもそんな柴田先生という人であんまり人のことは説明するのはちょっとあんまり把握するのは得意じゃないんですけれども、自分はもう大学生の時点で村上春樹さんのほとんどの代表作が出ていて、高校から大学にかけて一時期すごい村上フェーズというか、全部読むまで止まらないっていう時期はあったんです。でその
So as Moto said, it's really hard to explain why he's such a fascinating figure for other people. But to speak of myself, in college or by college, most of his major novels had already been out, and so I really went through a phase of reading Murakami from around high school to college.
でそれが不思議な感じで、もう好きか嫌いかどうかも分からないけども止まらないっていう感じだったんですね。
So it wasn't even a question of whether I liked him or not. I mean, that was never even an issue. I just had to read his novels.
そうですごい止まらないっていう気持ちが他の人にも起こったんだなっていうふうに考えたら理解ができるという、もうそこで止まってしまうんですけど。
So I can't really explain it, but the fact that I couldn't stop myself, that must have been a phenomenon that also happened to other people. So that's the only way that I can explain the fascination.
So let's ask Satoshi, who is a much younger man than Haruki. What do you think about?
I don't know. I think probably we are living in the psychologically similar environment everywhere. Because I lived in England for 30 years, and looking back 30 years ago, there's a huge gap between cultures, people, and like lots of people, lots of English people found it really awkward to talk to me, even if I spoke English, because I look different. So, but nowadays, if you go to England or not, and New York, of course, but anywhere, like maybe Paris and Rome, or somewhere in China, and a group of people talking in the pub or cafe, they all look different, different skin color and so on. But they're not conscious about it. I mean, that's a huge difference. It's a good, change. And I think, I have a feeling that he's the first person, probably the first person who wrote this psychological state.
The characters don't identify each other by their skin
That's
color
right.
or their name.
And also, they don't have, as if the character doesn't have a father or mother.
That's right.
Mother doesn't say, come home or, whatever. So that's why people can identify themselves.
Yeah, that's
I may
right.
be wrong. I don't know.
As many of you know, if you've read Haruki's works, there are almost never families in his stories. Sometimes, but usually it's quite dark. Another question. Wow, we have lots. Who has a mic? Maybe over here, this side of the room?
Hello. Hello? Yeah, I'd like to go off something Jay said at the beginning where he was concerned about the from in the title. I'm actually concerned with the rest of the title that comes after the word Murakami because that really wasn't addressed that much in the talk. It's not up right now, but I'm wondering if perhaps Ted or Jay or anyone else would be willing to discuss how in 20 years there could be a panel on a different author at the Japan Society. Young translators today, I'm actually one myself, thinking about contemporaries and, working novelists. And, we have this reverence in America and elsewhere for Murakami, but
Who's next?
who's next? And not even just who's next, but who's younger than him that should be translated and should be popularized in America?
Well,
You wanna start?
Monkey Business.
Okay.
This is issue 5 now.
That's-
And we've been doing it one a year for 5 years. And there are pieces by Murakami in Monkey Business. In this issue that we've brought for you today, there's a very wonderful essay by him, kind of like a speech to would-be writers, giving them hints about how to start their writing careers. But that's just a tiny fraction of the issue, and he's appeared in 3 or 4 of our issues. The rest is writers, various writers, including Aoko, and Furukawa Hideo, and Kawakami Mieko, and Kawakami Hiromi, and so many writers, I can't list them all. So many wonderful writers, and the idea of Monkey Business has been from the beginning to introduce English-speaking audiences to the other writers and to the younger writers, right? So that's what we're doing. Ironically, in the first issue, we included a long interview with Murakami because we knew that would help start the journal, because people are, of course, interested. It's about his whole career. It's a major interview. But there too, I think the really striking stories in that first issue were what propelled us forward from that point. And as we've gone forward, we have, thanks to Moto's connections and with the writers who he translates, been able to include totally original works by American writers as well, including Paul Auster, including Charles Simic, including Stuart Dybek, major writers. So it's evolving into a literary magazine that eclipses all of the barriers and boundaries, including visual, graphic work, and fiction, and essays, and poetry. So that's kind of what we're doing. And so I'm glad you asked that question, because we can say, not this is what should happen in the future, but this is what's taking place right now.
Jay, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to second that, to sort of add a little footnote, and that is that for the last year or so, I've been putting together for Penguin a new anthology of modern Japanese fiction. And my prime source is the now 5 issues of Monkey Business. I've got several stories that I picked up from that. Although not all of them, and one of the stories I found from another source that I definitely want. In fact, I just got the permission to use it 2 days ago. A story that Aoko had written about or indirectly related to the Fukushima disaster. I've just, of course, worked so long on Murakami almost exclusively that it's been a really good learning process for me to find out who else is out there. And one of the authors that I stumbled across was Aoko, and she has this wonderful poetic story called Margaret wa Ueru, right? Or Planting, I think it's called in the English translation. That I very much want to use in that anthology. So another couple of years, you'll have an anthology of modern Japanese fiction from Penguin.
Let's let Moto address this question too about up-and-coming Japanese writers.
That long Haruki interview that appeared in the first issue of Ours was done by Hideo Furukawa, who is a much younger writer and one of the best writers we have now. So it goes to, that interview shows that how younger writers were inspired by Haruki. And writers like Hideo Furukawa or Mieko Kawakami, or some writers, we haven't represented yet in the monkey business, writers like Machida Ko or Nakahara Masaya. If I have to mention one big difference between Haruki and these young writers, it would have to be voice. Their voices are so complicated. Haruki's prose is very, in terms of rhythm, it's very simple. It's very consistent. It's sort of easier to ride on. But these younger writers, and significantly, many of them are musicians too. So if I use music, how do you say? If I compare their prose to music, their prose is full of syncopation and full of radical changes in rhythm, and so it's much. Well, no. Of course, Haruki is hard to translate too, but their prose is very hard to translate. And admiringly enough, Hitomi Yoshio is a wonderful translator of Mieko Kawakami, whose voice is really hard to capture, but she does it.
One of those stories is going to be in the anthology also.
Okay.
Her translation
right. And Aoko has a very distinct voice too. In many of her stories, she uses voice almost like chant, and it really captures you.
Okay, before we get too chummy up here, we have a reception upstairs that will go on immediately after this. You can ask. I wish we had more time for questions, but you can ask all of these wonderful artists questions upstairs tonight, right after this, and there will be books for sale as well, and everyone will be willing to sign. So thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.